A military transport plane shook violently through the dark night sky. Emergency alarms blared as the pilot suddenly collapsed, the aircraft spinning out of control. The cargo bay full of Navy SEALs rocked wildly, faces pale with terror. The SEAL captain shouted desperately, "We need a pilot now!" The entire cabin fell dead silent. Nobody moved. Then suddenly a brown-haired woman in civilian logistics uniform stood up from the back row. She said calmly, "I can fly." Her name was Reina Vasquez, 32 years old with long brown hair that she kept in a neat ponytail during work assignments. She had a slender build and calm, observant eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing about her own thoughts or background. Reina worked as a civilian logistics coordinator for Special Operations Command, responsible for managing supply chains, equipment distribution, and administrative support for elite military units. Her current assignment involved accompanying a SEAL team to ensure that their operational supplies and documentation were properly coordinated during a classified mission deployment. To the Navy SEALs sharing the military transport aircraft, Reina was essentially invisible. She was civilian support staff whose job was to handle paperwork and ensure that supplies reached their destinations on schedule. Important work, perhaps, but certainly not the kind of work that earned recognition or respect from warriors whose lives depended on split-second decisions in combat situations. "She's good at what she does," Petty Officer Martinez had mentioned to his teammates before the flight, but let's be honest, logistics work is completely different from military operations. She handles spreadsheets and requisition forms, not life or death situations. Seaman Rodriguez was more dismissive in his assessment. "Look, I'm sure she's competent with supply management and administrative stuff, but when it comes to real military operations, she doesn't have the training or experience. She's civilian support, not a warrior." During the pre-flight briefing, several of the younger SEALs had made jokes about having a supply clerk accompany them on what was supposed to be a routine transport mission. They assumed that Reina's presence was simply bureaucratic necessity, ensuring that proper documentation accompanied their equipment and supplies. Reina never corrected these assumptions or tried to educate the SEALs about her background and qualifications. She simply focused on her assigned responsibilities, ensuring that every aspect of the logistics coordination was handled with professional excellence and attention to detail. But what the elite warriors didn't see were the small acts of service and care that Reina provided beyond her official job requirements. During the long flight, she quietly distributed water bottles and snack rations to SEALs who were struggling with air sickness or fatigue. She understood that proper hydration and nutrition were critical for maintaining operational readiness, especially during extended transport missions. When one of the younger SEALs noticed that his first aid kit had been damaged during equipment loading, Reina discreetly provided replacement medical supplies from her personal gear. She never made a show of these gestures, preferring to ensure that operational readiness was maintained without drawing attention to herself. She carried detailed knowledge of every piece of equipment on the aircraft, every supply allocation, and every operational requirement for the mission they were supporting. This information allowed her to anticipate needs and solve problems before they became critical issues affecting mission effectiveness. In her jacket pocket, Reina carried a small silver badge that had been with her for over a decade. The badge bore distinctive markings and a call sign that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the Navy's most elite aviation programs. Silent Hawk. The badge represented a life she had deliberately left behind, a world of high-stakes aerial combat and split-second decisions where excellence meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She had earned that call sign during some of the most challenging flight operations in military history, but those achievements belonged to a chapter of her life that she had closed years earlier. She would sometimes touch the badge during quiet moments, remembering the weight of responsibility that came with flying the world's most advanced military aircraft in defense of her fellow warriors and her country's interests. I remember when the plane took off. She stood quietly looking at the sky longer than usual. Those eyes, they didn't look like a logistics worker's eyes. Young SEAL's testimony. The emergency began 2 hours into what should have been a routine transport flight from Naval Air Station Norfolk to a classified location in the Middle East. The C-130. Hercules was flying at cruising altitude through clear night skies when Captain Williams, the aircraft's pilot, suddenly slumped forward in his seat, unconscious. "Mayday, mayday!" shouted Lieutenant Chen, the co-pilot, as he struggled to maintain control of the aircraft. "Pilot is unconscious. Aircraft is losing altitude. We need immediate assistance." The massive transport plane began to shake and roll as Chen fought to compensate for the loss of his more experienced partner. The C-130 was a large, complex aircraft that normally required 2 fully qualified pilots to operate safely, especially during emergency situations. In the cargo bay, the SEAL team was thrown against their restraint harnesses as the aircraft lurched unpredictably through the sky. Equipment containers shifted and strained against their tie-downs, creating a cacophony of rattling metal and groaning structural supports. "What's happening up there?" demanded Master Chief Petty Officer Johnson, the team's senior enlisted leader, as he tried to maintain his footing in the unstable aircraft. Lieutenant Chen's voice came through the intercom system, barely controlled panic evident in his tone. "The pilot is unconscious. I'm trying to maintain level flight, but I can't handle this aircraft alone. We need another qualified pilot immediately." The situation was critical. A C-130. Hercules was not the kind of aircraft that could be safely operated by a single pilot, especially under emergency conditions. Chen had basic flight training and some experience with the aircraft, but he lacked the expertise needed to handle a complex emergency situation while maintaining safe flight operations. Captain Rodriguez, the SEAL team leader, quickly assessed their options. "Does anyone on this aircraft have flight experience?" he shouted to his team and the small group of support personnel accompanying the mission. The response was immediate and discouraging. None of the SEALs had pilot training beyond basic familiarization with helicopter operations. The support personnel included mechanics, communication specialists, and logistics coordinators, but no qualified pilots. "Sir," said Petty Officer Martinez, "even if someone had basic flight training, operating a C-130 requires specialized certification and extensive experience. This isn't something you can learn from a manual." That's when Reina stepped forward from her position in the back of the cargo bay. "Captain Rodriguez," she said calmly, "I have flight experience." The reaction from the SEAL team was immediate skepticism mixed with barely concealed amusement. These were elite warriors who had trained for years to handle the most dangerous situations imaginable, and they were being offered assistance by a civilian logistics coordinator. "Ma'am," said Seaman Rodriguez with obvious condescension, "we're talking about flying a military transport aircraft in an emergency situation. This isn't a civilian training plane or a helicopter tour. This requires real pilot training and certification." Petty Officer Williams was more direct in his dismissal. "Look, I'm sure you mean well, but flying a C-130 requires years of specialized training. You handle supply coordination and paperwork. Those are completely different skill sets." But as the aircraft continued to shake and lose altitude, Reina moved toward the cockpit with a purposefulness that surprised everyone watching. She didn't argue with their assessments or try to convince them of her qualifications. She simply began moving with the confident authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "I need to get to the cockpit," she said firmly, pushing past the SEALs who were blocking the aisle. "Lieutenant Chen needs immediate assistance, and we don't have time for extended discussions about qualifications." As Reina reached the cockpit, her transformation became apparent to anyone paying attention. The quiet, unassuming logistics coordinator disappeared, replaced by someone whose every movement demonstrated professional aviation expertise and extensive flight experience. "Lieutenant Chen," she said as she entered the cockpit, "what's the pilot's condition, and what's our current flight status?" Chen looked up from the controls with obvious relief at having someone willing to help, even if he wasn't sure about her qualifications. Captain Williams is unconscious but breathing. We're at 28,000 feet, losing altitude slowly. I'm having trouble maintaining stable flight attitude. Reina quickly scanned the instrument panel, immediately identifying critical flight parameters and system status indicators. Her assessment was rapid and professional, demonstrating knowledge that went far beyond basic flight familiarization. Autopilot is disengaged, she observed, reaching for controls with practiced familiarity. Engine parameters are normal. We're dealing with pilot incapacitation, not mechanical failure. I need to take the co-pilot controls. Ma'am, Chen said with obvious confusion, are you actually qualified to fly this aircraft? Reina settled into the co-pilot seat and began adjusting flight controls with smooth precision. Lieutenant, I'm going to help you stabilize this aircraft and get everyone home safely. Right now, that's all that matters. The moment she put her hands on the controls, I felt something change. That wasn't someone learning how to fly. That was someone who had done this many times before. Co-pilot's account. What happened next would become one of the most remarkable emergency flights in military aviation history. Reina Vasquez, the quiet logistics coordinator who had been dismissed and overlooked by everyone on the aircraft, was about to demonstrate flying skills that would save the lives of everyone aboard. Flight control. This is Silent Hawk taking co-pilot controls, Reina said into the radio, using her old call sign without conscious thought as she began stabilizing the aircraft's flight attitude. The immediate response from air traffic control revealed recognition that stunned everyone listening. Silent Hawk, this is Norfolk Tower. We have you on radar. Be advised that your call sign shows inactive status. Please confirm your identity and current situation. Lieutenant Chen stared at Reina with growing amazement as she smoothly assumed control of the aircraft's flight systems. Silent Hawk, ma'am, that call sign, isn't that from the Navy's advanced flight training programs? But Reina was focused entirely on the emergency situation, her hands moving across the controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who had flown countless hours in military aircraft under every conceivable condition. Lieutenant Chen, I need you to focus on monitoring the pilot's vital signs and maintaining communication with ground control, she said calmly. I'm going to stabilize our flight path and begin descent to a safe altitude for emergency landing procedures. The transformation in the aircraft's behavior was immediate and remarkable. Where moments before the C-130 had been shaking and losing altitude unpredictably, now it flew with smooth stability that demonstrated expert pilot control. In the cargo bay, the SEALs noticed the change immediately. Master Chief Johnson unbuckled his restraints and moved toward the cockpit to assess the situation. What he saw when he looked into the pilot compartment challenged everything he thought he knew about their civilian logistics coordinator. Reina was flying the aircraft with professional competence that exceeded what many military pilots could achieve under normal conditions, let alone during an emergency. Her control inputs were precise, her scan of flight instruments was systematic, and her communication with air traffic control was crisp and professional. Silent Hawk, Norfolk Tower, came the voice from air traffic control. We show you as a Top Gun graduate with advanced certification in multiple aircraft types. Can you confirm your current pilot status? The revelation hit the cargo bay like a physical shock. Top Gun was the Navy's most elite fighter pilot training program, reserved for the most skilled aviators in military service. Only a tiny percentage of Navy pilots ever received Top Gun training, and even fewer earned the kind of advanced certifications that air traffic control was describing. Captain Rodriguez moved to the cockpit entrance, his expression showing the confusion and respect of someone realizing that his assumptions had been completely wrong. Ma'am, he said formally, I need to understand your background. Are you saying you're a qualified military pilot? Reina continued flying the aircraft while responding to his question. Captain, I'm a former Navy pilot with Top Gun certification and advanced training in multi-engine transport aircraft. I transitioned to logistics coordination after completing my active duty commitment. But why didn't you tell us? Asked Petty Officer Martinez, his voice filled with embarrassment about his earlier dismissive comments. Because my current job is logistics coordination, Reina replied simply. I wasn't assigned to this mission as a pilot. I was assigned to ensure your supplies and documentation were properly managed. As the emergency flight continued, Reina's expertise became increasingly apparent. She coordinated with air traffic control to establish emergency landing procedures, managed fuel consumption to ensure adequate reserves for multiple landing attempts if necessary, and maintained perfect aircraft control despite challenging weather conditions. Norfolk Tower, this is Silent Hawk, she said as they approached the emergency landing site. Requesting priority clearance for medical emergency. We have one pilot requiring immediate medical attention and a full passenger load of mission-critical personnel. The landing approach was executed with precision that would have been impressive under normal conditions, but became extraordinary given the emergency circumstances. Reina guided the C-130 through a perfect approach and touchdown, bringing the aircraft to a safe stop on the runway. As emergency medical personnel rushed to assist Captain Williams, the SEALs began to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Their quiet logistics coordinator had not only saved their lives, but had demonstrated flying skills that surpassed what most of them had ever witnessed. Silent Hawk, said Master Chief Johnson as Reina completed her post-flight procedures. I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. We had no idea who you were or what you were capable of. But it was the arrival of Captain Thompson, the base flight operations officer, that provided the full revelation of Reina's background. Silent Hawk, he said with obvious respect. Your service record shows some of the highest flight ratings in Navy history. Multiple commendations for combat flying operations, advanced instructor certifications. You were one of our most accomplished pilots. The SEALs who had made jokes about having a supply clerk accompany their mission now understood they had been in the presence of someone whose aviation achievements exceeded those of most military pilots they would ever meet. Ma'am, said Captain Rodriguez, his voice filled with respect and gratitude. You didn't just save our lives. You showed us that we had completely misjudged someone whose expertise far exceeded our own. Reina smiled with the same quiet humility she had always shown. Captain, I was just doing what needed to be done. That's what we're all here for. As the investigation into Captain Williams' medical emergency continued, he recovered fully from what turned out to be a severe allergic reaction. Word spread throughout the military aviation community about the legendary pilot who had been quietly working in logistics coordination. But Reina's response to offers of return to flight status reflected her commitment to the path she had chosen. I'm honored by the recognition, she said, but my place is supporting operations from the ground. That's where I can serve most effectively now. If you've ever misjudged someone based on their current job or position, type, I owe an apology in the comments below. In the weeks following the dramatic emergency flight, the story of Reina Vasquez's extraordinary piloting skills spread throughout Special Operations Command. But despite offers of promotion, return to flight status, and recognition ceremonies, Reina made a choice that surprised everyone who had witnessed her remarkable demonstration of aviation expertise. She declined all offers to return to active pilot duties. The morning after saving the lives of everyone aboard the C-130, Reina simply returned to her position as a logistics coordinator, continuing to ensure that supply chains and administrative support functioned smoothly for elite military units. But everything had changed in how the SEAL community viewed her and themselves. The SEALs who had shared the emergency flight became unofficial ambassadors for recognizing the hidden talents and backgrounds of support personnel. She saved our lives with skills we never knew she had, Petty Officer Martinez told anyone who would listen. How many other people are we overlooking because we don't understand their complete backgrounds? Captain Rodriguez implemented new procedures requiring all personnel, accompanying SEAL operations to document their complete training and experience, regardless of their current role assignments. "We can't afford to miss capabilities that might save lives in emergency situations," he explained to his command staff. The base's pilot training facility received a request from Reina to volunteer as an emergency instructor for pilots learning multi-engine aircraft operations. "I may not be flying operationally anymore," she told the chief flight instructor, "but I can still help prepare other pilots for emergency situations." Master Chief Johnson, who had been most skeptical of civilian support capabilities, approached Reina during a quiet moment in the supply warehouse. "Ma'am," he said with obvious humility, "I need to ask you something. How many other support personnel have backgrounds like yours that we don't know about?" Reina smiled with the same gentle patience she had always shown. "Chief, everyone who serves has experiences and training that brought them to their current position. Maybe instead of assuming we know what people are capable of, we should invest time in actually learning about the people we work with." The story of Silent Hawk's emergency flight reached the Navy's Top Gun training facility, where her former instructors remembered her exceptional performance and leadership during advanced pilot training. They sent a commendation recognizing her emergency flight and inviting her to serve as a guest instructor if she ever chose to return to aviation. But Reina's response reflected her commitment to the support mission she had chosen. "I'm grateful for the recognition," she replied, "but my place is ensuring that operational units have the support they need to complete their mission successfully." Late one evening, as Reina completed her logistics coordination duties and prepared equipment manifests for the next day's operations, she sat quietly in her office and pulled out the silver badge that had been her companion for so many years. The Silent Hawk call sign and Top Gun insignia seemed to glow under her desk lamp, reminding her of the legacy of service that connected her past and present missions. "Miguel," she whispered to the memory of her former wingman who had been killed during a training accident. "Today I flew for you again. I couldn't save you, but I brought everyone else home safely. I hope that's enough." The badge represented not just her past achievements in military aviation, but her ongoing commitment to serving others in whatever capacity was needed most. Flying had been her first calling, but supporting others in their missions had become her chosen path forward. As she prepared to leave the base for the evening, several of the SEALs from the emergency flight approached her with obvious gratitude and respect. "Ma'am," said Seaman Rodriguez, "we just wanted to say thank you. Not just for saving our lives, but for teaching us to never underestimate anyone based on their current job." Type, "I will live with honor," if you believe that true heroes often serve from unexpected positions. This story isn't just about a logistics coordinator who turned out to be a Top Gun pilot. It's about something much deeper that affects every organization, every team, and every workplace, where people make assumptions about each other based on current roles rather than complete backgrounds and capabilities. Every day in organizations around the world, there are people like Reina Vasquez, former military officers working in civilian support roles, retired executives who chose administrative positions to focus on work-life balance, accomplished professionals who stepped away from high-pressure careers to serve others in quieter ways. We dismiss them because their current job titles don't match our expectations of what expertise and accomplishment should look like. We assume that anyone working in a support role must lack the qualifications for more demanding positions. We forget that many people choose their circumstances based on personal values and life priorities, rather than having circumstances choose them. The tragedy isn't just that we're disrespectful to people who deserve better treatment. The tragedy is what we lose in crisis situations when we don't know what resources are actually available to us. How many emergencies could be resolved more effectively if we understood the complete capabilities of everyone on our team? Think about the people in your own workplace or community whose backgrounds you don't really know. The administrative assistant who handles complex problems with unusual competence. The security guard who offers insights that suggest much deeper knowledge than their job requires. The support worker who approaches every challenge with calm confidence that seems to come from extensive experience. What training might they have received in previous careers? What skills might they have developed during military service or specialized education? What experiences might they carry from navigating challenges that you hope you'll never face? Reina's story reminds us that true expertise often chooses humility over recognition. People who have proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances often feel no need to advertise their qualifications or demand acknowledgement for their capabilities. They know their worth isn't dependent on titles, status, or public validation. The SEALs who initially dismissed Reina weren't necessarily arrogant or disrespectful. They were products of a military culture that emphasizes current roles and chain of command. But their willingness to learn and change after witnessing her capabilities shows that growth is possible when we're open to recognizing our assumptions and limitations. Tomorrow, you'll encounter people whose stories you don't know and whose capabilities might surprise you if circumstances ever required them to step forward. Before you decide who's qualified to handle what responsibilities, remember the quiet logistics coordinator who saved lives with flying skills that nobody knew she possessed. Because the person sitting quietly in the back of the room might be exactly the person who has the expertise and experience you need when your own emergency situation arises. And they might be willing to help if you're wise enough to ask and humble enough to recognize excellence wherever it appears. If you believe in stories that reveal the hidden heroes around us, share this story and don't forget to subscribe to NL Touching Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten, real people creating real stories, not mass-produced AI content.